Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us. We're about to start. Let's just give everyone a minute. All right. Thank you all for joining us. We're so glad that you could join the webinar today. Our webinar is on positioning in tech services. This will be led by Aater Suleman, who is the ex-CEO of Flux7 and the co-founder of Vixul. We will have a Q&A session dedicated towards the end of this webinar. Please leave your questions in the comments, and we'll make sure that they're heard at the end. Over to you, Aater. Arthur, I think you're on mute. Could you unmute yourself?
Thank you so much, Fatma, and thank you for the reminder to unmute. I'll just start. So thanks all for making the time this morning, and really appreciate you all joining us. I'm going to be talking about a subject that is very dear to my heart, that is positioning in technology services. I will first start with a quick background about myself, and then we will dive into positioning, share a real-world example, and then talk about next steps that you can take to apply what you learned today into your tech services companies. So I started my career as an engineer. I went to school, engineering school at UT Austin, went through graduate school, and then after that, I was also involved in teaching at UT Austin for a few years. Meanwhile, my career started as an entrepreneur by founding a company, the name of Flux7. Flux7 was a technology services company that focused on DevOps and AWS consulting services. We were around from about 2013 to our acquisition by NTT Data Services in 2019. And it was during my time leading Flux7 that I learned a lot of lessons on how to build and grow a tech services company. And what I found was that positioning was, in fact, one of the most important aspects of what led to our successful journey. And that learning is what I will be sharing with you guys today. After the exit at Flux7, I spent a couple of years at NTT Data Services, leading the cloud portfolio. And then after that, we started Vixul, which we will talk about towards the end of the presentation. So let's jump into positioning. Actually, wanted to start with sharing some data. This is actually an excellent book that I would recommend by Hinge Marketing. It's called Spiraling Up. And if you look through all the data that they actually share about their experience helping services companies do marketing, they actually found that there's a very clear difference between what they call high growth firms and the average growth firms. The high growth firms have two distinct characteristics. One, they always pursue a well-defined group of target clients. They don't just say yes to whatever comes their way. Rather, they know who they want to work with. And they are 3x more likely to have a very strong differentiator that clearly separates them apart from their competition. And that is where positioning comes in. Positioning is what helps you differentiate from your competitors. It's worth sharing that in the definition of this book, a high growth firm is almost 9 times growing almost 9 times faster than the average firm. So these are real outliers. And one of the distinguishing factors was that they had stronger differentiated positioning. So what is positioning? One of my favorite thought leaders on the subject is David Baker. And another book that I would highly recommend from David is The Business of Expertise. And in this book, David actually defines positioning as the pivotal act of clarifying the problem that your consultancy is solving, for what audience, and the approach you are taking to solve the problem. And along any of these dimensions, a consulting service can distinguish themselves. So what does positioning really do? Once you understand the problem you are solving, who you are solving it for, and how you are solving it, it starts to create a consistent story across all your efforts that you actually build. And this goes to marketing, sales, delivery, and account management. So just to give a few examples, positioning is typically what would drive something like a tagline on your website. So companies that have a very clear understanding of what they do typically can just crystallize down to what they do in just one line, and that ends up on the banner on the website itself. For example, we help emerging technology services scale faster and build enterprise value. Clear and crisp. This is the problem we are solving. This is who we are helping. But it doesn't stop there. The entire website structure typically stems from the positioning, the elevator pitch, your LinkedIn descriptions. If you use Upwork to find clients, which a lot of emerging technology companies do these days, another place where you can actually use your clarified positioning. Your lead generation strategy is typically defined by who your customer is and what exactly do you want to approach them for. Your sales process, if you're working with enterprises as your target customer, it's a very different sales process than if you're working with small and medium businesses. So again, derived straight out of positioning. Delivery goes to what your customer values the most. If the main value proposition in your positioning is intimate service, then you want to approach it very differently. You may want to put people on site or actually have daily meetings, versus if your main value proposition or the process is about solving a problem by saving customers a lot of time and distraction, you may want to create a more hands-off delivery process from the customer perspective. And then lastly, how do you even define your success ties straight back from positioning? Because what problem are you solving is how you should be reporting success. That's the ultimate metric that the customer cares about. So with that explanation of why the positioning is important and where it can be used, let's nail this down to the role of positioning specifically in a tech services company. So fundamentally, there is no difference, a services company and a tech services company. However, there is a very important semantic difference that in a technology services company, typically there is focus on specific technologies. So unlike, say, a services company that is non-technology firm, for instance, a law firm or an accounting firm, a tech services company would typically have a bigger focus on technology because technology is a big part of delivering their value. So with that, at Vixul, I created this, what I call the 5 elements of positioning in tech services. What problem are you solving for your customers? That's derived straight from David Baker's definition. Which customer or who are you solving this problem for? What process are you using to solve this problem? And then what technology will you use in the pursuit of solving this problem? And then lastly, and kind of most important, is what is it that really makes you unique? Just to elaborate on that a little bit more, you may or may not want to be unique in every dimension. For instance, you may be solving the same problem that 50 other companies are solving, but you are solving it for a different customer. So that's what makes you unique. or you may be solving the same problem for the same customer, but while everyone else is using a staff augmentation like model to deliver it, you are using an agile model with a sprint based delivery. That's a unique process. Similarly, while everyone else may be solving an automation problem for the world through rule based automation, you may be bringing in AI to solve a particular process for a particular type of customer. And hence, that's a difference in technology. But what unique boils down to is and why it's at the center of this diagram is because that is what sets you apart. That is what, in your view, sets you apart from the rest. And I guess one actionable comment, there were a few folks who submitted their positioning to us before this event to get some personal feedback, an option that is still open to you if you would like to share. And I want to just pull out an important point that typically in a tech services company, your unique has to derive from one of these four elements. If you find yourself writing unique about something completely different, for instance, the culture of your company, while that's still a valid point, the challenge is that there isn't a single company in the world that says, oh, by the way, we have a really bad culture. Everyone believes that they have a good culture. So by the definition of the word unique, it is just not going to be unique. It's not what's going to set you apart. My good friend Tim Hamilton actually has a quote that I love to repeat here, which is that a positioning is something that somebody else has to be willing to take an opposite position on. So by saying that we have a good culture, you're not meeting that criteria because it is nobody in the world is going to say, oh, by the way, we have a horrible culture, and that's what our positioning is. So focus this exercise onto something that is genuinely unique and something that sets you apart. So just kind of use a few examples and perhaps share some good news before that. The good news is that most of the tech services companies in the world do not really have a positioning. In fact, if I were to put a canonical number, I would say more than 95% of the tech services companies that I have come across do not have a strong positioning. The consequence of that is that if you can just go through this exercise and actually put some real focus on setting yourself apart proactively, you immediately climb the ranks into the top few percent of the companies who do and starts to set yourself apart right from the get-go. But here are some of the more practical, real-world failures due to positioning. So this particular example is one of my favorites because it came in at a time where I was about to just go live to do a webinar on positioning about a year ago. And the same morning around 7 a.m., somebody reached out to me on LinkedIn. And I would not name the company for privacy reasons, but it's a great example of the most common state that most emerging technology services companies are living in. So let's spend a couple of minutes in just dissecting this example. So here's the message that I received on LinkedIn. This was my first introduction to this company. Never heard of them before. Hello, Aater. How are you? I'm the founder of Company X, and we help clients creating digital products, majorly apps/web. Do you have any tech needs that we can fill? We are looking for new work. Would you allow would you allow me on an introductory call via, and then put a Calendarly link there for me to set up a meeting? The realistic chances of me responding to this was zero to begin with, but I just did not stop there because that particular morning I was thinking about positioning very heavily. So first things first, I should also mention that this was not a free message that they sent on LinkedIn. This was actually a paid promotion that they ran on LinkedIn. So, and this is how money gets wasted in marketing. And sometimes folks then end up with comments like, well, we've tried LinkedIn and it doesn't work. Well, the problem isn't that the platform doesn't work. The problem is that the message just doesn't work. And so in this particular case, probably not a very successful campaign that led to a lot of wastage of a few $1,000s, making the either the marketing team or the agency got blamed for it, or the founders or LinkedIn got blamed for it. But the problem is completely somewhere else, as I'll show you in a second. So let's just say for a second that they did get my attention through this message. So what's the next thing I typically do? I'm not going to just go to Calendly and start setting a meeting. The second thing I did was I ended up on their website. So here's what the website said: best app development company for startups and brands. All right. Well, that already is a slightly different message than what we actually got here a second ago, which was it's a similar message. And for those who are technical like myself, can kind of draw the connection, but it's not the same word. It's not the amplification of the same message, but rather a brand new message that got thrown at me. Again, let's look past that for a second. The third thing I did was went to the founder's LinkedIn profile. And here is what the founder's LinkedIn profile said: our main business, where we help entrepreneurs and startups in creating their digital products, uh, and also extend our marketing services to help them profitable startup around apps or any other digital product. Some consistency. All right. Well, although a few things got thrown into it: wearable apps, websuits. All right. And then the first bullet is: we work as a journalist, though the main focus is on BD and consulting, marketing, BD, and consulting. Completely different message from what we were just dealing with. And this is just a symptom of the lack of a clear positioning. The company, frankly, does not understand what they do. And as a consequence of that, that's showing up across their efforts. And again, while it was perfectly legitimate for them to have run a LinkedIn campaign, uh, they're going to see a very low response rate, and the challenge would, and again, somebody else will get blamed. So the core of this is just the lack of clarity on what they actually do. So that's the no positioning. But bad and poor positioning is also very common, as I already mentioned. A couple of examples from positionings that I reviewed yesterday, which I have sent you all personalized feedback for those who submitted them. But here's a quick example: a problem, a positioning where the problem is we help with anything related to AWS. Let me state a cardinal rule: flexibility is valued by customers, but only in a very limited domain. Being too flexible is typically more confusing. Uh, uh, in fact, I will use another quote from a book by Aaron Ross. The book is called From Impossible to Inevitable, where he actually has an excellent quote which talks about how saying that you are an expert in a lot of things rather than impressing your customers actually deters them away and confuses them, because they can no longer understand which bucket to put you in. Because customers like to put us into buckets of, when I have this problem, I'm going to call this person. That's how we all work in our real life as well. So if somebody walks up to you and say, I can solve anything and everything, usually they don't fit into any of your common buckets. So that's the problem, the first problem with this positioning, which is helping with anything related to AWS. Right from the get-go is a very broad positioning. Lots of companies, there's about 125,000 AWS consulting partners today. So you put yourself in a very broad bucket. Who is the customer? Startups and SMBs. Again, a massive state. Too many startups in the world. SMBs, just millions and millions of customers here. Technology, very broad. The DevOps tools and other common DevOps tools, again, by stating that you can work with any DevOps tool, make you look that the customer will be more impressed. But what it really does is it confuses me, because as a customer, if you're good at everything, that gets typically just translated into you're good at nothing. In fact, another thing I would also share here is that it's particularly for tech services companies on the technology element, that if you say that you are an expert in 20 different technologies, web, mobile, whatever comes to mind, DevOps, because there are companies that I've come across which will have 10 things listed as their competencies. Here's the problem. The next thing I do, I go to your LinkedIn page and I see you got 15 employees. If you have a team of 15 people, which is an expert in 11 things, either you have only one person that's expert in each. I don't want to work with a company that has one person that's expert in each, because what happens if that person leaves? You're not going to have anybody. Or you basically have 15 people who are not an expert in anything, and this is just a list that you dreamed up. And that's what is an example of how customers get confused and then don't respond. Process, just being flexible. Like I said, flexibility is good, but really it does more to confuse the customer. Flexibility towards the end of the sales journey or during delivery is a different story, but saying that you're flexible doesn't really earn you many points. And again, nobody in the world is taking the opposite position and saying we are completely inflexible and never going to help you with anything else. That's just so it's not a useful statement to make. And then cheap pricing, same thing, same argument. Flexibility and cheap pricing is what thousands of other companies are saying to the same customer. So now let's actually switch and talk about what does good positioning look like. So here's an example. Actually, what I like this good versus bad example. I like to use them because it's basically and it's basically the exact same company. It's just a before and after that I'm showing you over here. The difference is that the before was when they did not put effort into it, and the after is when they actually put effort into thinking about what is it that makes them unique. And this is actually a very successful consultancy today. So let's talk about them one element at a time. So same thing, but rather than saying the problem is we do anything with AWS, which is first of all not even a problem, it's talking about it in terms of the customers and the way customers talk, which is I have a team of developers, development time is being wasted because my software engineers who should be writing features are busy creating CI/CD pipelines, but I'm a startup, so I don't have the money to hire a full-time DevOps, DevSecOps engineer. So that's a problem that this company will come in and solve. Very specific, hits a very clear pain point with startup customers, particularly in the economy that we have entered the last year or so when funding has become tight. Customers then are consistent with that problem. So they're only going to target startups with minimal funding. And the focus being on DevSecOps means that we only want to work in industries that involve some sensitive data like financial, retail, health tech. Technology, far more narrow list of what actually gets used, typically 80% of the time. The process is now, rather than saying we are flexible, we are telling the customer that we have a journey mapped out for you. You join us and we will be a companion in your journey and we'll hold your hand and take you through rather than you deciding your journey. So we will do a design sprint, then we will do an implementation. Typically, we'll do 6 to 8 weeks to migrate that application into a new platform. And then we will go into a management role to provide this long-term. Typical startup situation, if you think about it as a SaaS startup founder, that's basically what I need, is somebody to come in, make sure my design, my software is good from an infrastructure standpoint, from a security standpoint, build a new infrastructure deployment, and then move my application there. And what's unique is instead of putting on a fixed cost overhead, it's basically allowing the companies to jumpstart quickly in the beginning with some heavy lifting and then provide a very flexible support model towards the end. Now notice the word flexible came up, but in a very different context with a lot more clarity around who we are targeting and why they should come and work with us, because the customer can see that you understand their problem sometimes even better than they do. And the difference that this particular change made or typically makes. So your typical symptoms of bad or no positioning is, first, your marketing produces inconsistent results. As a result of that, you can never be sure if you're going to get your next lead or not, or whether it will be in 6 weeks or 6 months, because you're just tied to referrals. So you chase every prospect that comes your way, and in trying to win that every prospect desperately, you give them discounts because you believe pricing is going to help you, and see if you can lure them in. You keep saying yes to whatever they ask you to do, whether that's a technology you're familiar with or not. And oftentimes, both of these combined leads to you devaluing yourself significantly in the process. And so you end up with either the kind of customer that just doesn't like to pay and they're going to keep creating problems all the way, or you lose the quality customer. And overall, it's a spiral down where now, since you have lowered your pricing, you have less profit. Less profit means you have even less money to be confident next customer. And you can't, it's just a spiral down where the growth stalls, or is just obtained through very painful engagements with difficult customers. Stronger positioning, moving to the right, well, you start to get a controllable lead flow. You can never be 100% in control of lead flow. It follows some statistical distributions like the Poisson distribution, but it still gives you some control and surety that a next lead will be obtained in this much amount of time. Which means that clients who try to take you away too much, you actually just simply say, sorry, this is not our business model, not something we specialize in. So you're not just every day learning something new, dealing with hard clients. And you only are left with clients who respect you for saying no to them, because they are looking for an expert, some who can make them successful, not just cheap labor. And as a consequence of that, you're able to charge higher pricing, which gives you more money. That more money leaves you with extra cash, which gives you even more confidence next time. And it's a spiral up that begin, and how instead of stalling the painful growth, you end up in a position where you actually grow more consistently. So with that said, I've talked enough about positioning, but I'll just leave you all with a very quick next step, which is that what I suggest for those of you who are either planning or have already started a tech services company, to start with, first thing, just write down your positioning. In many cases, just the exercise of writing down 5 lines. What is my problem? What is the customer? What is the technology? What is my process? And what is unique about us? Will take you a long way. And in many cases, you may not have, if you haven't done something like this before, you may actually find that you don't even know the answers and you have to think about them. The second step that we suggest is that just take this through a simple 5-point test. These are, you can say, the 5 most common mistakes that we see in positioning. So for instance, for the problem, just looking at it and seeing, is this really how a customer describes their problem? Is this the problem? Or am I just saying something that is more a solution rather than a problem? For instance, we provide low cost resources. That's not a problem. In fact, the more important question is, well, why do they even need those resources? What is actually happening? And it's that zooming out that gives you the understanding of really what problem you're solving. Because really nobody's looking for engineers. What people are really looking for is trying to solve a problem and believe that the engineer is going to solve the problem. The who's the customer? I actually have used a test that David Baker talks about in his book, which is to limit the number of find a customer list. First of all, define the customer in a way that you can build a list, and estimate if you were to build a list, are you going to end up with 1 million customers or 100 customers? And he recommends the optimal size is somewhere between 1,000 to 10,000 customers. Less than 1,000, the market becomes a bit narrow, but that's still not too bad if you just have to build a better strategy to increase your hit rate. What's really worse is when you end up with a list that is 50,000 customers, because early stage tech services companies just don't have the marketing budget to compete with the big guys. And if the market has 50,000 customers, there will be bigger companies playing in that market already. You will not be alone. Technology, just coming up with a list of technologies that you focus on that are growing and at the rate similar to what you want to grow at. The process that can answer the question of how do we get started and what's after that, because that's really what a customer needs, is help me get started. If I sign up with you today, what happens? And how will I get to a solution? And then lastly, a unique claim that is a testable claim. So vague claims typically don't do very well, that cannot be quantified. For example, having a great culture. Again, culture is one of my favorite subjects, a big believer in it, but it's not a testable, unique claim. And then relevance to your customer, which is how does that uniqueness become important to your customer? And how this will the customer benefit from it? You can be unique in however way you want, but it has to be relevant to your customer. So with that, just my last slide. So my recommendation again, strive your positioning, score it using the 5-point test we just provided, and you're welcome to still submit your positioning for feedback. We have a form that you can actually fill and submit to us. It's a Google form. With that, I will spend just a second talking about Vixul. So Vixul is the current venture I'm a part of. And what we felt when we built Flux 7, our emerging technology services company, about 10 years ago, was that there was an extreme shortage of what I would call an ecosystem to help technology services founders. While, and not to sound jealous, but let's compare our ecosystem as technology services founders to the ecosystem of a product or a SaaS founder. If you're a SaaS founder, you can simply say, okay, well, let's read some books on how to do a better job. And on Amazon, there's a few hundred books that you can find. If you're an emerging technology services founder instead of a product founder, and you try to find a book, there's exactly 0 books on the subject. If you try to look for any conferences that you can join, attend to learn more, well, you have SaaSter, you have multiple other conferences on the SaaS side. On the services side, exactly 0 conferences that you can attend, which talk about how to build a better services or technology services company. If you are looking to join perhaps an accelerator or a structured guidance program, there's about 1,000 registered startup accelerators on the product domain, but exactly 0 of them accept technology services companies today. So we felt that there's a huge gap in the market, and that was a motivation for me and my partners to start Vixul 2 years ago. We want to really make available to technology services firms the resources that are commonplace for SaaS founders, so that they can also scale and build their companies and the equity in their companies quickly. So if you're interested to learn more, you can check us out on LinkedIn, follow us on LinkedIn, subscribe to our blog. We do post a lot of our best practices that we open source, and also offer some a service that can potentially help you, which very much mimics the model of Y Combinator. And we want to do, that from 20 years from today, Y Combinator is about 20 years old, and we hope that 20 years from today, Vixul will be looked at as a venture that actually changed the face of the technology services industry. That's the dream that we're working with. And with that, I'll just pause and see if there are any questions or comments.
Thank you, Aater. So we are now beginning the Q&A. One of the questions, the first question we have is, considering product or service positioning, would it be more advantageous to target 20 smaller clients or focus on acquiring 2 large clients?
It's if you're talking about number of clients acquired, I would say the 20 clients is a better business, and not the 2. And partly because 2 and 20, I feel are very interesting numbers. The general rule in any business, I'm going beyond just technology and beyond both services and product dimensions. Any business where you have just 2 clients is considered to be a very risky business, because if what happens if for whatever reason one of those clients disappears on you, you would be stuck. So letting any one client get too big compared to you leads to a sales risk, but it doesn't stop there. It also leads to, frankly, your company not having much equity value at all if you ever want to raise an investment, or if you want to exit the company, because any buyer would be really concerned about what happens if the relationship suffers with either of those 2. So I would say, not just in this context or even services, any business that you would ever build, you ideally want the 20 client model, not the 2 client model. And when it comes to pursuing them, same reason. If you have 2 today, you should be focused on getting 18 more, because that's actually the general. And I'll just finish it off with the general rule that you typically don't want any single client to get too big. 15% is a magic number. Some will say it's 30%, but somewhere in the 15 to 30% range is the maximum. How the revenue from how much is the maximum revenue you should tolerate from a single client. Otherwise, you're sitting on a very risky or thin ice, as they would say. Fatma, back to you.
Thank you, Aater. So we have another question. How do you manage the risk of positioning yourself with a particular platform before there is clarity in the ecosystem?
That's a great question. When you position yourself with a specific platform, in fact, maybe I should say that in a slightly bigger manner. When you position yourself, it's not a switch that you turn on or off. Positioning is usually about some research to understand whether that's based on internal data or external data on what's actually happening, then making a reasonably thoughtful decision to choose a positioning. Then I would still not say I use the word choose positioning and not adopt positioning, because I want to draw a distinction. Once you choose positioning, you should actually take it for a small trial. That's the equivalent of a minimum viable product in the product startup world. Effectively, try to just test how build a slide deck, talk to 20 people that you think are relevant, get feedback, get some conversations going, because that is what will actually give you more confidence in there. And and then you should only adopt. It's very common for you to take 2 or 3 different iterations on a positioning exercise to really find something. It's very reasonable for it to take a few months to really get to something that's clicking. And so coming back to your question specifically, which is when you tie yourself to a platform that is not yet certain, I would say there's 2 ways to do it. One is either you're seeing the light at the end of the tunnel already. I mean, if the platform's not established, but it's taking off, I'll use our example for AWS in 2013, when we chose AWS as our platform of choice for Flux 7. While AWS was not that big at that time, it was already showing signs that it's coming up. It was not even a line item on the Amazon.com's P&L statement, by the way. At that time, it was small enough, but the signs were all there. So we did do some diligence, and we basically made the decision to do it because we saw that people were looking for those services. At that point, mostly small startups, but then eventually it graduated. That's the first some market thought put into it. The second element of that, I think, is assuming that most emerging technology services have a strong, what they call a tech magician in there. I think this is one of those places where your CTO or CEO, whoever is the tech visionary, has to use some belief as well. So personally, we felt that at the time, again, AWS was upcoming. It could have gone down, but we felt, having used the technology and understanding of what the world needs, that this would solve many problems, and that's why we bet on it. So, and then I would say one last thing, which is positioning is inherently an exercise which will increase your risk a little, because when you go narrow, you increase the risk of choosing the wrong thing. It's very inherent to this exercise. The reason I'd still recommend doing it is because if you don't take that small risk that can be calculated and minimized, you will actually end up with a company that's very painful to grow and scale. So it's a risk worth taking. And yes, there is a risk involved. And yes, you'll have to use some belief. And yes, you'll have to use some market data. And even then, try it before you adopt it. So that's kind of a 4-legged answer that I will give to your question.
We've got 2 more questions. One of them, the first is from Amjad Paracha. Considering dynamic nature of technology and customer startup needs, shouldn't processes vary from customer to customer? This is the first question. The second question is from Umair Hussain, which is, with technology constantly evolving, how often should we revisit our positioning to stay relevant?
So I think it's more in sequence of the first 2 questions. So I will answer the second question first, which is, how often should you revisit your positioning? I'll give you a very practical answer and a bit more of mindset, philosophical answer as well. So the very practical answer is that if you have not changed your positioning in 2 years and you're in the technology services business, something has gone wrong. Because no matter what unique thing you find, there is enough competition in this space in general that somebody will start to catch up with you, either as a product or as a solution or as a services. So, for example, some very technical, geeky examples come to mind from several years ago. But at one point, we were able to just differentiate ourselves by having a compiler that could compile YAML into JSON and allowing people to write infrastructure as code in YAML, which was a far cleaner language than JSON, which is where how AWS CloudFormation used to be in JSON. Well, less than 2 years later, guess what? The word got out. AWS actually launched the YAML version of CloudFormation. All of that effort that we had put in, used as a differentiator, is gone by then. So if you have to be prepared that you're going to be disrupted no more than 2 years, typically even shorter times. It's also not days and weeks. I would say that as well. That's experience talking. I don't have data to back this up, but I've never seen a technology that you find today gets disrupted next week. It actually doesn't happen that way. Even if something brand new comes out, like the YAML thing coming out, took months for it to really get used. But so we had enough time to figure something new out. So you don't have to be paranoid that somebody's going to come snatch your lunch tomorrow. But if you have gone 2 years and you don't see a problem, that just means something is being hidden from you, and you need to do your more thorough research. The second part of that philosophical answer is it's something that you should really be looking at all the time. Let's just put a number on it. I would typically say every quarter, it's very reasonable to be at least looking at your positioning and saying, does this still make sense based on what has changed in the world? And is this something I want to continue for another, without change for another quarter? Or if a minor adjustment is required, just make the adjustment. Now, coming back to the first question, which I think was from Amjad, and the idea of, as a matter of fact, I'm going to pause here. Sorry, Fatma. Can you repeat Amjad's question? I think I've
Yes.
a couple of words in there.
Considering the dynamic nature of technology and customer startup needs, shouldn't processes vary from customer to customer?
Yes. So the word I was wanting to make sure I respond with, the exact quote was vary from customer to customer. Samjit, that's a very reasonable thing to say, that your customers would want you to vary your process, or you would think that that's the case. What tends to happen is that it's not really startup to startup. If you look at the entire set of startups in the world, you'll probably find that there's 30, 40 types of customers. I'm just making a number. Let's just say 30 types of different startups. And within each group, there is a lot of consistency. For example, I will give you a good example from a very personal experience of about 10 years ago, when we used to work with healthcare startups as a part of Flux 7 in helping them bring their infrastructure to AWS. There was a very consistent problem, and back in that era, when most typical healthcare startup, right? And this is the reason I'm pointing that out is because narrowing your market is what gives you this deeper understanding that I'm about to share with you about a particular class of client that I could not have said about startups as a whole in the world, right? Healthcare startups in the year 2014, what do they need? Typical startup is picking up, and it has has 2 or 3 coders. The coders start to code the application. They come up with a cool demo. The cool demo starts to look interesting to some big company or some big VC. Next question gets asked: are you guys secure and compliant? Because nobody wants to put healthcare data on a platform that's not. Almost 100% the answer was not today. But the second answer was, we will be there in 30 days. Now, what does that really mean? That those founders will then come back home and start frivolously searching on the internet. Can I find somebody within 30 days who can make me pass this audit and get me into a compliant infrastructure that is compliant with the HIPAA laws in the US? And then at that point, if you showed up, and rather than saying, you tell us what you need, we gave them a process, and we said, well, we'll first come and have a understanding. It was a day-to-day breakdown of the process, not even a week-by-week breakdown. Day one, we will understand what is the business problem you are trying to solve. Day two, you will show us what your application architecture is and explain all the building blocks. Day three, we will go over with you on all the options that are there. There is a total of 34 decisions that need to be made. Day four, we will sit down and develop your DevOps and CI/CD pipeline strategy. Day five, we will give you a final architecture that you need to implement. $5,000, 5 days, only 5 hours taken from you, so you can be busy selling that you really want to do. If that all works out, the following Monday, we will start the implementation. We will first build the infrastructure. We will first do cloud formation generation. Then we will set up and I'll not bore you with all the steps, but I want you to understand now you may think that we are taking the flexibility away, but for the customer, where we understood the need, this showed them that we understand their problem better than them. And then you will supplement it by saying, well, we've done it 30 times. Oh, and by the way, while everyone else is quoting you $5,000, for us, it's going to cost about 50 because we know what we're doing and we are who you want to work with if you really want to win this deal. The others, you can try your luck. We have no problem, but we will not give you any discounts. Well, guess what? Nobody wants to buy failure, even if it's free. So giving 50 was much easier for them for 30 days of work than it would be to work with somebody who they have to decide what the process is and make their best guess. So long story short, so I would say your intuition is right. It's to some extent, but clustering your customers and then understanding which cluster can work with what process can give you a lot more power in the relationship rather than being flexible and saying, you tell us what you want us to do, or coming up with and proposing a new process that you have even never tried before for every customer. Going in and in fact, there were customers who would say, well, we don't want to follow this 3-step process that you just laid out. We feel that all we need is a couple of engineers. I used to get that a lot. And my answer would be, well, we are not the right vendor for you because we believe that this process is how success gets created for us. You may find somebody who has a different way of creating success. If they have the same kind of credentials, we are not the right company. Well, guess what? 7 out of 10 times next morning, they will call and say, well, we have decided we'll work with your process and pay you the higher fees because you know what you're doing. The others are asking us what to do. So that's very long-winded answer with several examples, but that's the way to think about this problem and why it's so important to not be too flexible.
Thank you, Arthur. Nobody wants to buy failure even if it's free. That's great insight. Our next question is from Abu Turab. This is actually a scenario. The scenario goes, if we deeply specialize and position in providing service A today, when is it the time to get expertise, build a team, and provide service B, which is highly linked and integrated with service A, and the current clients that are getting service A are already asking for service B?
So if I understood the question, Abu Turab is, well, when is it a good time to start service B when clients for service A are already asking for it? I think
Yes,
that
and this service B is highly linked and integrated with service A.
so there's a couple of ways to answer that question, and I think this actually is one place where so we've talked about positioning today, but there is one thing in my opinion that goes above positioning in your planning for the company, and that is your mission and your vision for the company. So what exactly is the vision? Where do you want to take the company? If you want to be the best in the world at service A, then I would recommend that even though it's very tempting, holding back on service B may be wiser, because if that's where you want to take the company, and obviously it's not just an emotional decision. If you assume that you have growth goals where you want to build this company up to $10 million in revenue, service A is alone enough to take you down the path to $10 million revenue. There is enough demand for it. You are very good at it, and you would rather be known as the world specialist in service A. Stick to service A, because even though how tempting it is, be aware that as soon as you will introduce service B, it's highly integrated, it's in demand, but it's going to introduce some new marketing, sales, and delivery burden on your teams. It's just not possible for you to throw something else in there and not. But there is an alternate path. This is not the correct path. There is an alternate path, which is where you see service A, where the vision of the company is that you want to be, for instance, the best agency in solving this particular problem, or the best consultancy that can get, you're just solving a bigger problem. The problem you're solving perhaps is taking software to production faster. Now, service A was one part of the problem, which was to setting up their GitHub repositories correctly and getting all the initial CI/CD in place. Now you realize that there is a second problem, which is under my umbrella of my mission, which is my customers will not be able to deliver software faster unless I also provide this other service where they're getting hung up on. Completely legitimate to start service B at that point. So some of it does go a little bit to one decision above it, the beyond, above services, above positioning, which is mission. So I always look at this as a hierarchy, by the way. And your question about services is fantastic in that realm. Mission goes on top, positioning goes under it, because positioning is what supports the mission, and services are what go under positioning. So it's okay to have multiple services, and the as long as they stay under the positioning and positioning stays under the mission, and everything is in sync with each other, which is actually the real job of a CEO, often never talked about, which is keep all these things in sync with each other. It sounds easy, but it's pretty complex to keep all of this in sync with each other. One quick recommendation, by the way, Butterab, for you, a book to read. I think is very much addressing this exact question. It's called Built to Sell. Uh, Fantastic book. Again, it's a narrative of a company that actually went down from having multiple services down to just one service, and the pros and cons of what they observed. I would highly recommend reading it. Back to you, Fatma.
Thank you. Do we have any more questions, or shall we call it? All right, I think we can conclude the webinar. Okay, one more question. What percentage of work should be experimentation and exploratory work?
That's a great point, actually. And I think I would probably give you again a very quick answer and then speak a little bit more with some theory behind it. So in a very pragmatic way, I'm a big fan of the 80-20 rule. So whenever you ask me a question like that, my answer would be 80% day-to-day, 20% exploration, because that just tends to work in most cases. But I do want to qualify it with what is exploration. Again, I don't know what you mean, so I'm making a couple of assumptions here. So please kind of filter the answer based on your exact scenario. But I will tell you that in services companies, basically, there are a couple of different types of explorations that happen very commonly. One is that a services company starts becoming excited about building a product. And a very common, frankly, I would say a very common mistake is that they start thinking that they can be a product company because they believe that they know how to build a technology and two customers have bought something similar, so there must be a product here. Going to state a very hard reality. Product companies are fundamentally marketing companies. So if you believe you can build a product, that just means that you got about 20% of the work figured out. The rest 80% is still to be determined. So do not fall for that. So if that's what you mean by exploration, I would say there are scenarios where it has been done, but they're very far and few. The generic answer should always be that's not a good use of money, even 20% for exploration. However, if what you're doing is exploration of new technologies in your services business, so for example, you're working with generative AI and a new tool has come about, a customer is interested in trying it, you want to learn and see if that's a better tool and maybe a future positioning, that's an amazing investment, right? Like, so being very clear in your head on what you're exploring and why, I think, is the key. So the 80-20 rule assumes that you're being very logical with the choice of what you're exploring. Don't just explore for the sake of exploring. But if you see something very logical, where this can be, in fact, one of the most logical things is that this can be your new positioning. For example, you're exploring a new process, a new technology, a new type of customer, in the hopes that you see potentially that this could be my next positioning, which we already discussed, needs to be revised regularly anyways. That's a really good use of your time and energy.
All right, thank you. All right. Thank you, Arthur. With just 5 minutes left, we've got two more questions. The
Okay.
first is from Tech Hive, which is, for how long should you try the positioning before pivoting to something else? And should I read you the second one right now as well? Would you?
No, let's just do one by one because
All right.
the context falls out of my head.
All
I'll
right. No
just make
worries.
it quick though. So, how long should you try a positioning? Great question. There is not a straight answer, but two parts to that. If you are seeing something that's not clicking, what I mean by that is you aren't having people just reach out to you, you're not getting engagement on your LinkedIn posts. There's a whole discussion on what do you mean, what does it even mean by trying a positioning, and I won't get into it, we don't have the time. But if you're doing the trying correctly and it's a solid experiment, I wouldn't even wait 30 days before you start talking about an adjustment. Even 30 days is long because there's no reason to be wasting money trying something that's not clicking. When it clicks, it clicks. And that's, again, experience talking. So I would be pretty quick if that's the scenario. But again, you have to be doing a valid experiment before you can use its results. And that's a topic we'll probably not be able to get into today. But on the flip side, and that's why in fact I will go even a step further and I'll say it's not even trying, it's validating positioning, validate it within a couple of months, and if it's not clicking, then move to something else. Why would you stick with it? And but if you have a current positioning that was working but is no longer working, that's a slightly different story where you may have to give it a little bit more time and try to understand and diagnose the issue, and can take up to 2 to 3 months even sometimes.
Thank you, Arthur. And the next question that we have is from Christian, which is, what do you think about building tooling for your own consumption and selling it as a product to other companies offering services in the same niche?
Great question, Christian. First answer, I think very highly of building tooling for yourself. Selling it as a product to other companies, again, has the idea has occurred to probably everyone before us, and many of them, including myself, have tried that exact journey. And the only thing I can tell you is it's a lot harder than it seems. What tends to happen, unfortunately, is that you'll have a few customers that will start paying, and after that, you'll be now stuck with providing training, updates, bug fixes, support. But the real mass sales, where you need hundreds of customers to really justify having a product and providing those elements, will require an aggressive marketing, which is typically where services companies are just unable to justify spending more than half their money on marketing the way product companies typically can with VC backing. So that'll be the one. Again, there are exceptions to the rule, but overwhelmingly, unfortunately, I think that model is tried, tested, and almost always fails. I don't mean to be too negative, but lots of experience talking here, not just mine, but with hundreds of other people I've talked to as well.
Thank you, Arthur. And that's all the time that we had today. Thank you all for joining us. We encourage you to follow us on LinkedIn and other social media channels. If you still have any questions, please go ahead and either drop us a DM on LinkedIn or any of our social media channels, or you feel free to email us your question, and we'll get back to you. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.